You're listening to Guardians of Galen, your go-to podcast for USC Trojan basketball.
Let's get started.
Welcome back to Guardians of Galen, the podcast that dials in on USC basketball. As always, I'm your host, Casey Kasliner. As yesterday, the Trojans upset Rutgers, team they lost to by 10 points in the regular season. But I have a special guest joining me today, Terence Holton, the founder and creator of Terence's World. You should go check it out. Great podcast. Terence, how you doing?
Casey, you're too kind. I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to record this. I'm incredibly excited to be on Guardians of Galen.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have you. And, it was certainly a crazy game. Double overtime, multiple guys playing 40-plus minutes. Wesley Yates played 50 minutes. But just to recap, the first round, we had a few ups. Actually, every game was an upset. Northwestern, number 13 seed, takes down Minnesota. Nick Martinelli has 28 points. Ty Berry has 14. And then Iowa, the 15th seed, the last seed in the tournament, takes down Ohio State 77-70. Peyton Sanford leads the team with 17 points. So the Trojans followed suit. They had an upset as well. And yeah, I guess, Terence, what were your initial thoughts after that game, for USC Rutgers at least? Double overtime. The Trojans really probably aren't supposed to win this game. That they blow a 15-point lead, but they get the job done in double overtime. What was sort of your initial reaction?
Yeah, for starters, it was an awesome game. Whenever you have a double overtime game where your team pulls away with the victory, it's going to be very fun to watch. I think you mentioned it, though, just the amount of guys playing 40-plus minutes. You just look at the bench. It was basically the starters playing the entire game, and they all played pretty well, really apart from, St. Thomas, which we can get to in a second. But it was a great game for USC. I'm glad they won at least one just for the program going forward. I think they really needed that, just even a little boost.
Yeah, and you mentioned the starting lineup. First of all, 3 Trojans had 20-plus points in this game. Desmond Claude leads them with 28. He has 8 of 13 from the field. Didn't find the 3-ball, but luckily Wesley Yates, Chibuzo Abo, Rashawn Agee were really shooting well, and this was one of USC's best three-point shooting games all year. They shot almost 44%.
I'd say maybe the best, right?
Yeah, probably. I wish I had the data on that. But also, 2 Trojans had double-doubles, and we haven't. Can't remember the last time I've seen, a basketball game, really, let alone any game, where I've seen 3 guys with 20-plus points and 2 guys with double-doubles. And it's so hard to do in college, but of course the extra 10 minutes helps. There were 7 lead changes, 11 ties in this game. USC turned the ball over 21 times, and that was sort of the reason why they blew that 15-point lead.
Yeah, the turnovers were definitely a bit of a problem. Obviously this team, they struggled pretty heavily against Rutgers when they played in New Jersey earlier this year. Obviously we both watched that. And it was the Rutgers, their star players, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, getting them confused, who really led the way for them. But I'm seriously just looking at this, and I think USC's overall just ability to stick with their starters is what won them this game. Just the ability to get points, because I can't imagine that there's been a single time this year. Once again, don't know the data for sure, but I can't imagine there's been a single time this year where there's been 3 guys with 20-plus.
Yeah, I don't think all year. I think there's been definitely 2.
Yeah, at least.
I think Yates and Claude have gone off, and I think there was one game where Abo had 20-plus and Claude did, and what Yates didn't. I talked about this previously for the viewers listening. It's always 2 out of the 3 that do well.
Yeah. Between
Abo, Yates, and Claude, never all 3, and you need all 3 really to do well in a Big Ten like this. Another thing too, USC had 31 free throw attempts, and made 25 of them. Look,
that's
I know
big. That doesn't happen a lot for USC.
Yeah, and that's a lot of that's on Desmond Claude. He went to the charity stripe 15 times. He made 12 free throws, and then AG goes 7 of 7. That's big for a big man, and then 6 of 6 for Yates. They're free throws, but that's 25 free points, and you had the potential to have 31. So that's huge.
Yeah, you just talk about this team has struggled with free throws early in the year. Look back at the UCLA game. They shot 57% from free throws, missed a ton of crucial ones down the stretch. That's what lost them the game. Now they're playing Rutgers in a winner-go-home situation. They hit their free throws, they win the game. That's just how it works.
Yeah, and you brought up, I want to go back to Ace Bailey for a moment and Dylan Harper, because last game, like you mentioned, in the first one, it's a 10-point win for Rutgers. It was actually probably closer than the scoreboard says, because USC actually did play a pretty good second half compared to their first. But in that first game, Dylan Harper has 25, Ace Bailey has 14. Not the best game for Ace Bailey, but in this game, he fouls out in the second half, and that's huge.
Major.
And he only played 33 minutes, and I say only because this game went to 50
just in
minutes.
Comparison, yeah.
Yeah, and Dylan Harper put it all on the line, and he ran out of gas. USC hit a few threes in double overtime. Rashawn Agee and Wesley Yates They took an 8-point lead eventually in second overtime. But Rutgers, another thing too I wanted to bring up, because this is going to come up against Purdue today. Rutgers had 48 points in the paint, and they scored. Final score was, I don't. Sorry, 97 to 89. I was looking at the last one. 97 to 89. I mean, that's about half their points, over half their points in the paint, and so that's going to come up against Purdue and Rashawn Agee. I like his game. I think he's a good stretch 4. I don't think he's a 5.
No, yeah, let's be honest. He's a little small. He plays big and he plays oversized, but at the end of the day, he's 6'8". He's not that big for who we're playing at center, who the Trojans are playing at center. So overall, he can't. I don't want to say he can't contend with the top of the Big Ten centers when you got guys in Purdue. He's just not big enough, and I mean that in no disrespect, but he's just not tall enough.
Yeah, and another thing too, just kind of going back to Rutgers, they went 6 of 30 from 3, and USC this year has struggled a lot containing the 3. Yep. If USC's done one thing well, I feel like it's clogging the lanes. They didn't do that against Rutgers, giving up 48 points in the paint, but I feel like you have a guy like St. Thomas who can clog the lane pretty well, and other pretty good interior defenders. Whereas I love Wesley Yates, and I think Desmond Claude is great too, but those guys can't really defend the 3-point line. But they did last night, and so yeah, I don't know. We wanted to talk about St. Thomas for a moment because he was kind of the one USC starter that didn't do well.
He was really the only USC starter that didn't really do well. Abo wasn't fantastic, but he still shot 3 for 8 from 3, had 13 and 10. But St. Thomas, at this point, it's more of just I think that lineup was gelling well together. That's why he still had 42 minutes. But he hasn't been, obviously he was averaging 20 and about 9 last year for Northern Colorado.
He had a really good season.
Yeah, phenomenal season after transferring from Loyola Chicago. But he just has not been a great scorer on ball. We've talked about this off air, but he just has been a lot better off the ball, not on ball, and he is more of an on-ball scorer.
Yeah, I feel like the ball should really never be in his hands unless he's creating a play. He's a really good playmaker. You look at his box score line. I mean, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, but he's 2 of 7 from the floor. And it's weird because it feels like his confidence, or I don't know if it's confidence, but something mentally changed for him kind of early on in the season, maybe partway through, because it felt like he was sort of an alpha on this team. He was a guy that was going to, the ball was in his hands. He was a threat. He was going to call the ISO. He was going to drive to the hoop. Maybe, not a good 3-point shooter, but a guy who was dangerous with the ball, kind of like a Kevin Durant type player. It's you didn't really know what he was going to do with the ball, but he has just been really, really bad with the ball and careless with it as well. I mean, only had 2 turnovers in this game, and 2 Trojans had 6 turnovers. So
Yates and Claude, of course.
But I think really for Thomas, I think if they kind of gel him into, the season could be one more game, so it's really not more.
It could end later tonight.
Yeah, it could end later tonight. But I think at the end of the day, he should be a facilitator full time. Yeah. And one other thing I wanted to talk about was, at least on the topic of USC, was these guys, like we mentioned kind of earlier in the show, all played 40-plus minutes. Then you have to, go to sleep, wake up, and you're already training for Purdue. You played, a full 50 minutes, more than an NBA regulation game. How do you think, obviously they're going to be tired, but how do you think that sort of would come into play against a team like Purdue that's very good?
Look, Purdue fully knows that USC was just in a late-night double overtime game, and that game ended, Central Time, probably 10:30 or something like that?
At least,
It ended really late.
There were challenges, too.
Yeah, exactly. It was a super late game, and they know that the starters, the best players for USC, just put their bodies on the line in everything out there for the first game. They're going to take advantage of that. They are going to, I think you talked about just going down low and how USC scored a lot of points, Rutgers scored a lot of points in the paint. I think that it's possible Purdue tries to kind of force their way in there and score a lot in the paint and just bully down this already badgered USC team.
Yeah, because Josh Cohen, I know he was injured briefly, and we don't really get updates on injuries too much, at least at this level.
Absolutely never.
But we know that Josh Cohen was kind of phased out of the lineup to begin with, and it's not that I want him in the lineup. I don't think he's very good, but I think you don't really get. Rashawn Agee plays bigger than he does, and I think he is a pretty good defender. But 48 points in the paint, even if it was 35 or a number lower than that, I think it's pretty unacceptable. Not that Cohen is a great defender, because he's really not, but he's a little bit bigger than Rashawn Agee. But I think one main takeaway I had from this game is Trojan fans need to do everything in their power to make sure Desmond Claude does not leave in the transfer portal. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the country, let alone the Big Ten. He, for context, he's the only reason that USC was able to force overtime. They blew a lead.
Yep.
Dylan Harper had 7 points in what was a 9-2 run for Rutgers, and they went ahead 65-63. That was their first lead since 5-2 beginning of the game. Claude ties the game with a layup, 8 seconds left, and then in overtime, the first overtime, he has 6 points, which is, in a 5-minute span, pretty good. And then 4 points in the second overtime. He was clutch, and that's what they need. And if they're gonna go on a run, which is unlikely, but if they want to make a run to the Big Ten championship, Desmond Claude is going to have to be fed the ball and be clutch, and I want the ball in his hands in those moments. I think that the Trojans have a really special thing having a guy like Wesley Yates and Claude, because those two guys I think are like equally lethal options, and I think they're really different. Like Wesley Yates can score at all 4 levels. Desmond Claude really can't, but when he's a tenacious driver like he was in this game, it's scary. So that's kind of what I saw from them, but I think the Trojans need to stop giving up big runs. I mean, 11-0 run to get back in the game. That was Rutgers. I talked about the other run, and threes win you games in March. And USC shot good from the 3-point line. Rutgers didn't. That's the difference for me. 6 of 30 versus USC having a pretty solid 43% game, shooting 10 of 23. That's the difference. So
no, I completely agree. Like you said, threes in March win you games. You look at all these like little mid-major schools who in the NCAA tournament upset some big-time school, and it's because they get hot from 3. So USC is going to need to continue this hot 3-point shooting streak. I don't know how sustainable it is, but they need that. I agree with you.
Yeah, definitely not sustainable given what we've seen this year. I think Chibuzo Abo is like the one question mark every game, because I've talked about it before on other shows, but he'll either go like 1 of 8 from 3 or like 7 of 12.
Yeah, there was like a stretch there. I forget which games it was, but he hit like 9 shots in a row, 9 threes in a row, something ridiculous.
Career high. Yeah. I think it was Penn State.
It started in Penn State and ended in Maryland, I think.
Yeah, something like I do remember that. But let's move on to kind of previewing Purdue, because USC is playing them at 6 p.m. Pacific time in the second round of the tournament. And it's an interesting bracket for sure, because if USC wins this, they'll go on to play Michigan, a team that they could have beaten earlier in the year. I mean, Desmond Claude fouled out, and it was a pretty close game. I mean, they have multiple 7-footers on their team. USC doesn't. The game was at Galen Center during a holiday break, so there weren't many fans. I wasn't at that game, but
I wasn't either. I can't say.
But USC's path to the Big Ten championship isn't like the hardest thing ever. Like if they beat Michigan, they probably play they either play Iowa, Illinois, or Maryland. And they've already beaten Illinois. They've already beaten Iowa this year, and then Maryland they lost to. But
they did show a little bit of fight in that Maryland game, though. They did storm back in the second. Of course, ended up losing by 18, but they did storm back from down 20 and cut the lead to like 6, I think.
Yeah,
maybe 7 or 8. But they showed some fight in that, and where it was in College Park, so it could be different if we're talking way out though. In fairness, that's 3 games away.
Yeah, so 3 games away. That's purely hypothetical. we got to come back to reality, and with reality,
being positive polys is what we are.
Positive poly. That's funny. The Trojans were prisoners of poly against UCLA a few days ago. I was going to use that as a title, but I never got to making the UCLA recap because it was too depressing. But they're playing Purdue next. They lost by 18 points to Purdue earlier in the season, not that long ago. But Desmond Claude, importantly, was not playing in that game. That was a stretch where he was injured, and that was a pretty dismal game for USC. They had to go to the bench, but Wesley Yates had 30 points on 50% shooting, 11 of 22. He was 2 of 6 from 3 in that game. Made a few free throws. The second leading scorer, you probably wouldn't have guessed it, was Isaiah Elohim, who had 11 points off the bench in 15 minutes. Really good, efficient game for him. I hope he comes back. And Jalen Shelley had 10 points. So the freshmen looked good.
All the freshmen, yeah.
Yeah, all the freshmen, including the red shirt. But Desmond Claude didn't play, and you lose by 18. I think you have him in that game. You probably lose by single digits. Or, you know,
no,
Purdue didn't play that good in that game.
Yeah, look, that was the Wesley Yates show, and that's literally all it was. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but he had at halftime 22 of USC's, what was it, like 40-some points, maybe 30-some. They were down by a ton, and no one else on the team had over 4, if I'm not mistaken. And Yates had 22, and he was taking over, so full credit to him for just going crazy. But someone else has to do something. You can't have a starter on the team that no other starters score more than 7, And obviously you mentioned Desmond Claude didn't play, and that's a huge factor, and Purdue for sure knows that. But the other starters, other people are going to have to step up in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, the 3-pointer and to my point earlier is the deciding factor in this game. Because in the first game, Purdue, I don't think Purdue wins by as many as they do if they don't shoot 50%. They shot 33 of 66 from the field. That's very good.
Yeah.
But they were terrible from 3-point range. They were 6 of 26. That's about 23%. USC, on the other hand, didn't shoot bad from the floor. They shot about 41%. But from the three, they were 4 of 26.
I was waiting for that.
And it's not even like Desmond Claude's the difference in that regard because he's not a big 3-point shooter. And so, yeah, pretty bad. And they were also out-rebounded 31-19. But looking at Purdue, they're very top-heavy. They have a big three of Trey Kaufman-Renn, Braden Smith, and Fletcher Lawyer. And Purdue was pretty inconsistent kind of heading into the tournament. They had a 4-game losing streak after the USC win. And those were bad losses, too. They lost to teams like unranked Indiana. They lost to Michigan State, who wasn't super hot at the time. They lost to Wisconsin. These aren't bad teams per se, but for a team that was, ranked, I believe, number 7 at the time, those are bad losses. They also lost to Michigan. That was a 4-game losing streak. And Trey Kaufman-Renn was actually held to his season low against Indiana, 9 points. Mm-hmm. And look, Indiana, USC, I think those are pretty equal caliber teams. I think, obviously Indiana beat USC, but the point I'm trying to make is he had 9 points against an unranked, not great team in Indiana. If USC can force him to something like that, I mean, might have an interesting story here tonight. But Braden Smith did not play good against USC, and Fletcher Lawyer was only solid. It's like if you can replicate that and maybe decline a little bit of Trey Kaufman-Renn, who's one of the best players in the country, you might have yourself another surprise.
I'm inclined to agree with you just because you are right. Trey Kaufman-Renn and those guys, they did go on a little stretch of not playing good. But against USC, Kaufman-Renn had 24 on 8 for 12 shooting with 10 rebounds. And while Smith didn't shoot the ball that well, he had 13 assists. It's difficult especially when you have 3 like alpha players, including Fletcher Lawyer, like the Boilermakers do. It's really hard to contain all of them, especially because USC inconsistently has 2 alpha guys in Yates and Claude.
Yeah, and we saw against Rutgers, they sort of inconsistently contained their top 2. And were very, I think if Ace Bailey doesn't foul out, I think
it's maybe a different story.
I think it's
USC's maybe not here.
Yeah, I think it's almost certainly a different story. I think Rutgers wins. Like he would probably play 15 more minutes than he did.
Yeah.
He was already having a good game. He was shooting over 50% from the field. USC got a little lucky in that regard, but luck is what you need to win the tournament. So do you have any sort of prediction for the Purdue game? Score, does USC even have a chance?
Yeah. Well, one thing we didn't mention, we talked about this a little off air, but where the Big Ten tournament is held is only 1 hour from Purdue's campus, compared to the probably 4-hour flight from LA that it is to
what fans are going to that,
exactly.
Respectfully.
I can think of one person who's there right now. I don't see this going well for USC. I'm not going to say it's basically a home game, but it's 6 p.m. Purdue fans are going to have time to go to the game if they want to. There's probably already a lot in Indianapolis. I'm going to say something. It's going to be something similar to last time. I'm going to say 92-78.
Okay.
Purdue.
I think, I definitely have Purdue winning. Sorry, fans. I have it being a little closer than you said just because, I think USC having Claude, and I think when guys get hot, they really are going to continue that. I think, Purdue wins. I think it's going to be 93-84. 9-point game.
Okay, yeah.
I think,
but we both think that Purdue's going to score over 90.
Yeah. Okay. I think USC's defense was just not very good against Rutgers. I don't think it's been great all year. It started good, but you get in the conference.
It was good against Michigan State that one time.
Yeah, that one time. And Illinois. I want to talk, but I want to open this up because you brought up a good point about USC fans not really responding well so far to the Big Ten move, and we saw against. In the Pac-12 last year, fans came out, but that was mostly because of Bronny. Let's be real. And the team
100% was because of Bronny.
Pretty much because of Bronny, and you have Isaiah Collier too, and the team was looking competitive early on. But Eric Musselman said something after the UCLA game that was pretty got fans talking for sure. Not on an official interview, but he was walking out and he said, "Now that's what you call a home court advantage," referring to Pauley Pavilion, which is USC's crosstown rival. What did you make of that, and how do you sort of see that coming into play in future seasons per se?
Look, I think he's right. It's something I love USC. I love being a student here. I love our athletics. The one thing I will say about USC is I think that this place has some of the worst fans ever. With all due respect to our fellow students, people don't care. It's women's I'll say women's basketball, they kind of do, but they're really good. So in that perspective, I think USC they're fair weather fans. And it kind of stinks for like us. We love basketball, we love football, we love all of this stuff, and it's fun to go to games. But there's a lot of people who do not care unless you're good. So the problem with it is they're going to need to improve rapidly if Eric Musselman wants to bring people in the building. And it stinks.
Yeah. And I think Eric Musselman's done a pretty good job with like the resources he's had. Like you see him going out to local things in LA, trying to get fans.
Yeah.
But it's so hard when you have like the Lakers who have Luka Doncic now. You have Intuit Dome just open. You have UCLA hoops. You have, USC, UCLA women's hoops who are both very good.
Yeah.
Like USC is like the 6th or 7th ticket in town for basketball at least.
Yeah.
The South Bay Lakers. I mean,
I wasn't even thinking about just basketball. You're 100% right. I think right now they're probably the least popular basketball team in the city of Los Angeles.
I agree. And I think
it stinks.
It does. And I think next year, assuming they bring in, I can't assume, but Elijah Arenas is looking promising to USC. He committed already. So, but
I think he signed too, didn't he?
Did he sign? Okay, maybe he signed.
Maybe I'm wrong, but
I thought he just committed, but maybe but Musselman has hinted in the press conferences that he's coming. Like he said,
yeah.
"Oh, I can't say who, but this guy's going to be a game changer." We know who he's talking about. It's a 5-star. He's one of the best players in the country,
right.
in the class. So I think that's going to help. But you talked about Purdue probably having a home game tonight. I mean, I look at this bracket, and there's probably only a few teams that like USC wouldn't have like a home advantage over at a neutral site. Like the Midwest is going to show up. That's the point I'm trying to make. Like if they go on next round and play Michigan, that they're going to get outnumbered. Michigan fans travel. If they go on to play Illinois somehow in the next round, like there's going to be fans there as well. And USC, like to their credit, have been like a really good road team this year compared to home.
You're right.
Like they have some good road wins. Like they beat Illinois on the road, beat Michigan State at home. And I guess more recently it's been a little worse, but they've gone like toe to toe with some, like they had a good game against Indiana, against Umar Ballo's great game earlier in the year.
Right.
But I think you make a great point, and I think nothing's going to change until they not only start winning, but have players that like resonate with the fans. Like you see over at UCLA, like they have, like I could name like their whole starting lineup because I know that they have guys that gel together. These guys like love playing for UCLA. And I guess that's sort of the difference. Like I feel like UCLA for the oldest time in basketball has been a team that's centered around like the team first. Like we're not individuals. We're the UCLA Bruins. John Wooden preached that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas UCLA is more about getting guys to the league. It's like,
You mean USC?
USC, sorry. USC is more about like, okay, we have one good player and a bunch of bad players but hey, I mean DeMar DeRozan's going to make the NBA, or hey, Boogie Ellis is really good. So I think that's sort of the difference I've seen over the past few years and like decade plus at this point. So I don't know. I think do you see Eric Musselman like getting disgruntled? Because he's been pretty upset at a lot of points this year, but he's also a big personality.
I think, you are 100% right. He is a big personality, but I think like it's totally possible that he gets frustrated with the lack of fans coming in. I mean, Casey, you've only got 2 more years here, and I've only got another year. The fans who actually care about this are starting to leave. So it's obviously we'll be replaced by people, but it's hard. It's frustrating, especially I just want to highlight one game in particular. We were both at the USC Michigan State game, and there were go green, go white chants that were basically louder from anything in the upper decks. It was ridiculous. It felt like at best a neutral site game. It was terrible.
Yeah, and you see, football, same thing, Penn State.
Right. Yeah.
And I think basketball is more of an issue because it's like football is thriving on the recruiting trail.
Yeah.
Best class in the 2026 year, and
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed as of right now. But also like football has such a legacy, championships and whatnot.
Right.
Like basketball at USC is such a weird thing to me because it's kind of the one sport like that of the big ones, like baseball, basketball, football, that just hasn't had that historical success.
It's the only one that doesn't have a national title. I mean, you look at obviously women's basketball is pretty historical, and just like the players they've had national titles back in the 80s. Obviously, men's doesn't really have that. I mean, that Elite 8 run back in 2021 was the best they'd ever done, if I'm not mistaken.
It was.
Yeah.
I believe it was. I believe they had a few Sweet 16 appearances in like the 90s, and maybe before that, like Harold Miner and some other guys, and then DeMar DeRozan, I think.
I think
kind of
Nick Young too, maybe.
Nick Young, yeah, they've had some good years, like Nikola Vucevic as well.
Right.
But all in all, I mean, this program should be big. Like, there's no reason this program can't succeed. There's
the city of
absolutely
Los
no
Angeles.
reason.
It should be the exact same as anything else. This should be a prime target to come play here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Musselman has a lot of work to do. I think he should be upset, but I think he should know that like his work was cut out for him. Like when he signed with USC, they had like 3 guys on the roster, if that.
Yep.
Like,
And I mean, the only people who stuck around from last year were Harrison Hornery and JD Plow.
one of which was a walk-on, one of which got 2 minutes a game.
Exactly.
So I think he knows he had his work cut out for him. I think Musselman is like a good guy. I think like I think his coaching's good too. I like his like offensive sets he runs. I think like overall he's a good coach, and we saw that at Arkansas. But I think if he can go out and beat Purdue, which we both think he won't, people are going to start talking. People are going to start talking, and that's what he needs.
Some buzz.
Yeah, he doesn't even need like necessarily like obviously they're not playing at home for the rest of the year. He's not expecting to like fans to show up, but what he needs is conversation,
right?
Because conversation is going to lead into and they have Elijah Arenas coming, and they have Jerry Easter on the way maybe, or LZ Harrington, and that's going to really create some buzz. And then guys like Desmond Claude, who already has been, I think really like been good for him, his own personal brand. Like he's really gained a lot of prowess. He's not like obviously your everyday household name, but people are talking about Desmond Claude.
Yeah.
So
no, you're right.
That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of that, honestly.
Do you have any sort of closing thoughts as we wrap up here?
Closing thoughts. Let's see. USC next year is the year I think people really need to start paying attention to USC basketball. I think if you bring back Claude, Yates, and then bring in Arenas, that's a really and then let's see, who else can they bring in? Bring in like a big starting center. Then I think they've got a team. I think they've got a solid team going forward.
I think so too, and I think they're going to try to bring back AG. I'd like him off the bench, honestly. I think if you bring in a big
graduate student, isn't he?
But he had the JUCO.
Oh,
so
yeah. He probably does have a year or 2.
Yeah, Eric.
Yeah,
Musselman,
then I'd like him back too.
Yeah, I agree. And then maybe Terrence Williams. Like he showed some good flashes. It was like their third.
He only played like 7 games, and then tore his ACL, right?
He broke his wrist, I believe. He had a cast on.
So,
something.
Something season ending.
Yeah, you're on the right track there. So I agree. I think if they don't put fans in seats next year and they don't like win, if they don't make the NCAA tournament, I'm gonna go as far as saying that.
Hard, yeah.
Like they're gonna set themselves back many years.
Yeah.
And that we don't want that to happen. And I don't think like a lot of people want that to happen, because I think like this program was once at a really good pinnacle. So that's what's just gonna do things. Like I said, USC plays Purdue tonight at 6 p.m. Thank you for tuning into this one after the Rutgers win. What a win for USC in double overtime. Desmond Claude leading the way with 28 points. But thank you so much, Terrence, for joining me again. We'll definitely have you on. You're a friend of the show.
Love that. Hey, thanks for having me, Casey. Happy to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you again here on this Thursday morning. But thank you again, guys, and have a good day.